keep saying fifth book at a time. Sorry about that. Right, so we're going to read Alex Rider, the fifth book, called SCORPIA. I'll be reading you the first letter is F. Actually, the first letter of the book is obviously A for Alex Rider. In the paragraph, it's F. F. Who I know that starts with an F? Nobody. Okay, let's start reading, yeah? Chapter 1, Extra Work. For the 2 thieves on the 200cc Vespa scooter, it was a case of the wrong victim, in the wrong place on the wrong Sunday morning in September. It seemed that all life had gathered in the Piazza Esmeralda, a few miles outside Venice. Church had just finished and families were strolling together in the brilliant sunlight. Grandmothers in blacks and boys and girls in their best suits and communion dresses. The coffee bars and ice cream shops were open, their customers spilling onto the pavements and out into the street. A huge fountain, all naked gods and serpents, gushed jets of ice-cold water, and there was a market. Stalls had been set up, selling kites, dried flowers, old postcards, clockwork birds, and sacks of seed for the hundreds of pigeons that strutted around. In the middle of all this was a dozen English schoolchildren. It was bad luck for the 2 thieves that one of them was Alex Rider. It was the beginning of September. Less than a month had passed since Alex's final confrontation with DeMay and Quayle on Air Force One, the American presidential plane. It had been the end of an adventure that had taken him to Paris and Amsterdam, and finally to the main runway at Heathrow Airport. Even as 25 nuclear missiles had fired at targets all around the world, Alex had managed to destroy these missiles. He had been there where Quay died, and at last he had gone home with the usual collection of bruises and scratches, only to find a grim-faced and determined Jack Starbright waiting for him. Jack was his housekeeper, but she was also his friend, and always she was worried about this. "You can't keep this up, Alex," she said. "You're never at school. You missed half the summer term when you were at Skeleton Key and loads of the spring term when you were in Cornwall, and then at that awful academy. At awful academy at Point Blanc. If you keep this up, you'll flunk all your exams, and then what will you do?" "It's not my fault," Alex began. "I know it's not your fault, but it's my job to do something about it, and I've decided to hire a tutor for you for what's left of the summer." "You're not serious." "I am serious. You've still got quite a bit of holiday left, and you can start right now." "I don't want a tutor. I'm not giving you any choice, Alex. I don't care what gadgets you've got or what smart moves you might try. There's no escape." Alex wanted to argue with her, but in his heart, he knew she was right. MI6 always provided him with a doctor's note to explain his long absences from school, but the teachers were more or less giving up on him. His last report had said it all. Alex continues to spend more time out of school than in it, and if this carries on, he might as well forget his GCSEs. Although he cannot be blamed for what seemed to be a catalogue of medical problems. If he falls any further behind, I fear he may disappear altogether. So that was it. Alex had stopped an insane multi-millionaire pop singer from destroying half the world. And what he had got for it? Extra work. He started with ill grace, particularly when he discovered that the tutor Jack had found actually taught at Brookland, his own school. Alex wasn't in this class, but even so, it was an embarrassment, and he hoped nobody would find out. However, he had to admit that Mr. Gray was good at his job. Charlie Gray was young and easygoing, arriving on a bicycle with a saddle bag crammed with books. He taught humanities, but seemed seems to know his way around the entire syllables. We've only got a few weeks, he announced. That may not seem very much, but you'd be surprised how much you can achieve one-to-one. I'm going to work you 7 hours a day, and on top of that, I'm going to leave you with homework. By the end of the holidays, you'll probably hate me, but at least you can start the new school year on, and more or less even keel. Alex didn't hate Charlie Gray. They worked quietly and quickly, moving through the day, from maths to history to science and so on. Every weekend, the teacher left behind exam papers, and gradually Alex saw his percentages improve. And then Mr. Gray sprang his surprise. You've done really well, Alex, but I wasn't going to mention this to you, but how would you like to come with me on the school trip? Where are you going? Well, last year was Paris. The year before it was Rome. We look at museums and churches, palaces, the sort of thing. This year we're going to Venice. Do you want to come? Venice! It had been in Alex's mind all along. The final minutes on the plane after Demey and Gray had died. Yasen Gregorovich, the Russian saint who had cast a shadow over so much of Alex's life. Yasen had been dying. A bullet lodged in his chest. But just before the end, he'd managed to bullet out a secret that had been buried for 14 years. Alex's parents had been killed shortly after he was born, and he had been brought up by his father's brother. Iron Rider. Earlier this year, Iron Rider had died too, supposedly in a car accident. It had been the shock of Alex's life to discover that his uncle was actually a spy and had been killed on a mission in Cornwall. That was when MI6 had made their appearance. Somehow they had succeeded in sucking Alex into their world, and he had been working for them ever since. Alex knew very little about his mother and father, John and Helen Ryder. In his bedroom he had a photo of them, a watchful, handsome man with close-cut hair, standing with his arm around a pretty, half-smiling woman. He had been in the army and still looked like a soldier. She had been a nurse working in a radiology, but they were strangers to him. He couldn't remember anything about them. They had died while he was a baby in a plane crash. That was what he was told. He had been told. Now he knew otherwise. The plane crash had been as much as a lie as his uncle's car accident. Yasenka Gregorovich had told the truth on everyone. Alex's father had been insane, just like Yasen. The two of them have worked together. John Ryder had once saved Yasen's life, but then his father had been killed by MI6, the very same people who had forced Alex to work for them 3 times, lying to him, manipulating him, and finally dumping him when he was no longer needed. It was almost impossible to believe, but Yasen had offered him a way to find proof. Go to Venice, find SCORPIA, and you will find your destiny. Alex had to know what happened 14 years ago. Discovering the truth about John Ryder would be the same as finding out about himself. Because if his father had killed people for money, what did that make him? Alex was wrong, angry, unhappy, and confused. He had to find SCORPIA, whatever it was. SCORPIA would tell him what he needed to know. A school trip to Venice couldn't have come at a better time, and that didn't stop him from going. In fact, she encouraged him. It's exactly what you need, Alex, a chance to hang out with your friends and just be an ordinary schoolboy. I'm sure you'll have a great time. I said nothing. He hated having to lie to her, but there was no way he could tell her the truth. Jack had never met his father. This wasn't her affair, so he let her help him pack. Knowing that, for him, the trip would have little to do with churches and museums. He would use it to explore the city and see what he unearthed. 5 days wasn't a long time, but it would be a start. 5 days at Venice, 5 days to find SCORPIA. And now he was here. an Italian square. 3 days of the trip had already gone by, and he had found nothing. Alex, do you fancy an ice cream? No, I'm all right. I'm hot. I'm going to get one of those things you told me about. What did you call it? Granada or something? Alex was standing beside another 14-year-old boy who happened to be his closest friend at Brookland. He had surprised that Tom Harris was going to be on the trip, as Tom wasn't exactly interested in art or history. Tom wasn't interested in any school subjects and was regularly bottom in everything. But the best thing about him is that he didn't care. He was always cheerful. He was always cheerful, and even the teachers had to admit that he was fun to be with. And what Tom lacked in the classroom, he made up for. Tom lacked in the classroom, he made up for on the sports field. He was the captain of the football team and Alex's main rival on sports day, beating him at hurdles, 400 metres and the pole vault. Tom was small for his age, with spiky black hair and bright blue eyes, so he wouldn't have been found dead in a museum, so why was he here? Alex soon found out. Tom's parents were going through a messy divorce, and they packed him off to get him out of the way. It's Granita, Alex said. It was what he always ordered when he was in Italy. Crushed ice with fresh lemon juice squeezed over it. It was halfway between an ice cream and a drink, and there was nothing in the world more refreshing. Come on, you can order it for me. When I ask anyone for anything in Italian, they'll just stare at me like I'm mad. In fact, Alex only spoke a few phrases himself. Italian was one language Iron Ryder hadn't taught him. Even so, he went with Tom, ordered 2 ices from a shop near the market stall. One for Tom and one, Tom insisted, for himself. Tom had plenty of money. His parents had showered him with euros before he left. Are you going to be at school this term? He asked. Alex shrugged. Of course. You were hardly there last term or the term before. I was ill. Tom nodded. He was wearing diesel light-sensitive sunglasses that he had bought at Heathrow duty-free. They were too big for his face and kept slipping down his nose. You do realize that no one believes that, he commented. Why not? Because nobody's that ill. It's just not possible. Tom lowered his voice. There's a rumour you're a thief, he confided. What? That's why you were away so much. You're in trouble with the police. Is that what you think? But no, but Miss Bedfordshire asked me about you. She knows we're mates. She said you got in trouble for once nicking a crane or something. She heard about from someone and she thinks you're in therapy. Therapy? Alex was scared. Yeah, she's got quite sorry for you. She thinks that's why you have to go away so much. You know, to see a shrink. Jane Bedfordshire was a school secretary and an attractive woman in her 20s. She had come on the trip too, and he did every year. Alex could see her now on the other side of the square talking to Mr. Gray. A lot of people said there was something going on between them, but Alex guessed that the rumour was probably accurate as it was the one about him. A clock chimed 12. In half an hour, they would have lunch at the hotel. They'd have lunch at the hotel. Where they were staying, Brookland School was an ordinary West London comprehensive, and they decided to keep costs down by staying outside Venice. Mr. Gray had chosen a hotel in the little town of San Lorenzo, just 10 minutes away by train. Every morning they'd arrive at the station and take the water bus into the heart of the city, but not today. This was Sunday and they had the morning off. So Tom broke off. He broke off. It happened very quickly. Both boys had seen it. On the opposite side of the square, a motorbike had surged forward. It was a 200cc Vespa Gran Turismo, almost brand new, with 2 men riding it. They were both dressed in jeans and loose, long-sleeved shirts. The passenger had on a exhaust helmet, as much to hide his identity and as to protect him if they crashed. The driver, wearing sunglasses, steered towards Miss Bedfordshire as if he had intended to run her over, but a split second before contact, he veered away. At the same time, the man riding pillion reached out and snatched her handbag. It was done so neatly that Alex knew the two men were professionals. Scipitori, as they were known in Italy, bag snatchers. Some of the other pupils had seen it too. One or two were shouting and pointing, but there was nothing they could do. The bag was already accelerating away. The driver was crashed away on the handlebars. The partner was cradling the leather bag in his lap. They were speeding diagonally across the square, heading towards Alex and Tom. A few minutes before, there had been 8 people everywhere, but suddenly the centre of the square was empty and there was nothing to prevent them escape. "Alex!" Tom shouted. Stay back, Alex warned. He briefly considered blocking the Vesper's path, but it was hopeless. The driver would easily be able to swerve round him, and if he chose not to, Alex really would spend the following term in hospital. The bug was already doing about 20 miles an hour, and its single-cylinder 4-stroke engine carrying the two thieves effortlessly towards him. Alex certainly wasn't going to stand in its way. He looked around him, wondering if there was something he could throw. A bucket of water, but there was no net and the fountain was too far away. Although there were buckets, the bag was less than 20 meters away, accelerating all the time. Alex sprinted and snatched a bucket from the flower store, emptied it and scattered dry flowers across the pavement, and filled it with birdseed from the stall next door. Both stall owners were shouting something at him, but he ignored them. Without stopping, he swung around and hurled the seed at the Vespa just as it was about to flash past him. Tom watched, first in amazement, then with disappointment. If Alex had thought the great shower of seeds would knock the two men off the bike, he'd been a mistake. They would continue regardlessly. But that hadn't been his plan. There must have been 200 or 300 pigeons in the square, and all of them had seen the seed spray out off the bucket. The two riders were covered in it. Seed had lodged into the folds of their clothes, under their collars, and in the sides of their shoes. There was a small pile of it caught on the driver's crotch. Some had fallen into Miss Bedfordshire's bag. Some had been trapped in the driver's hair. For the pigeons, the bag thieves had suddenly become a meal on wheels. With a soft explosion of grey feathers, they came swooping down, diving on the two men from all directions. Suddenly, the driver had a bird clinging to the side of his face, its beak hammering at his head, ripping the seed out of his hair. There was another pigeon. At his throat, and a third between his legs, pecking at the most sensitive area of all. His passenger had 2 on his neck, another hanging off his shirt, and another half buried in stolen bag, and more were joining in. There must have been at least 20 pigeons flapping and batting around around them. A swirling cloud of feathers, clawed and triggered by greed and excitement, flying splatters of white bird droppings. The driver was blinded. One hand clutched the handlebars, the other tore at his face. As Alex watched the bike performed 180-degree turns, and now as he was coming back, heading straight towards him, moving faster than ever. For a moment he poised, waiting to help himself aside. It looked as if he was going to be run over, but then the bike swerved a second time, and now it was heading for the fountain. And the two men were barely visible in a cloud of beating wings. The front wheel hit the fountainhead, and the bike crumbled. Both men were thrown off the water. In the brief pause before he hit the water, the man riding pillion yelled and let go of the handbag almost in slow motion. The bag asked through the air. I took 2 steps and caught it, and then it was all over. The two thieves were a tangled heap, half submerged in cold water. The Vespa was lying buckled and broken on the ground. 2 policemen who had arrived when it was almost too late were hurrying towards them. The stall owners were laughing and applauding. Tom was staring. Alex went over to Miss Bedfordshire and gave her the bag. I think this is yours, he said. Alex? Miss Bedfordshire was forward. How? It was just something I picked up in therapy, Alex asked. Alex said. He turned and walked back to his friend. Chapter 2. The Window's Palace. Now, this Now, this building is called the Palazzo Conterni de Bovolo, Mr. Gray announced. Bovolo is the venetation word for snail shell, and as you can see, this wonderful staircase is shaped a bit like a shell. Tom Harris stifles a yawn. If I see one more palace, one more museum, one more green now, I muttered, I'm going to throw myself under a bus. There aren't any buses in Venice, Alex reminded him. A water bus then. If it doesn't hit me, maybe I'll get lucky and drown. Their windows framing exotic masks, brilliant coloured glass vases, dried pasta and antiques. It was a museum, maybe yet one that was truly alive. But Alex understood what Tom was feeling. After 4 days, even he was beginning to think that he'd had enough. But I don't think he had. He needs more. He had enough statues, enough churches, enough mosaics, and enough doors all crammed together beneath the sweltering September sun. Like Tom, he was beginning to feel overcooked. And what about Scorpia? The trouble was that he had no idea what the accent Horowitz had meant by his last words. Scorpia could be a person. Alex had looked in the phone book and found no fewer than 14 people with the name living and in and around Venice. It could be a business, or it could be a single building. Scuol were homes set up for poor people. The Scala was an opera house in Milan. Ooh. That reminds me of AC Milan, a football team. In Milan. Scorpia. Scorpia was very carefully concealed. Perhaps inside one of these old palaces. Alex looked again, and the staircase that Mr. Gray was describing. How do you know that these steps didn't lead to Scorpia? Scorpia could be anywhere. It could be anywhere. It could be anywhere. It could be everywhere. And after 4 days in Venice, Alex was nowhere. We're going to walk back down to Freseria towards the main square, Mr. Gray announced. We can eat our sandwiches there, and after lunch there, after we have lunch there, we'll visit St. Mark's Basilica. Oh, great, Tom exclaimed. Another church. They set off. A dozen English school children with Mr. Gray and Miss Bedfordshire in front talking animatedly together. Alex and Tom trailed at the back, both of them gloomy. There was one day left, and as Thomas made it clear, there was one day too many. Oh, great! Tom exclaimed, another church. They set off a dozen English school children with Mr. Gray and Miss Bedfordshire in front talking animatedly together. Alex and Tom trailed at the back, both of them gloomy. There was one day left, and as Tom had made it clear, there was one day too many. He was, as he put it, all cultured out, but he wasn't returning to London with the rest of the group. He had an older brother living in Naples, and he was going to spend the last few days of the summer holidays with him. For Alex, the end of the visit would mean failure. He would go home, the autumn would begin, and that was when he saw it. A flash of silver as the sun reflected off something at the edge of his vision. He turned his head. There was nothing. A canal leading away. Another canal crossing it. A single motor cruiser sliding beneath a bridge. The usual facade of ancient round walls dotted with red roof tiles. He had imagined it, but then the cruiser began to turn, and that's when he spotted it a second time and knew it was really there. A silver scorpion decorating the side of the boat, pinned to the wooden bow. Alex stared as it swung into the second canal. It wasn't a gondola or a chugging public vaporetto, but a sleek private launch, all polished teak. contained windows and leather seats. There were 2 crew members in immaculate white jackets and shorts. One at the wheel, the other serving a drink to the only passenger. This was a woman, sitting bolt upright, looking straight ahead. Alex only had time to glimpse black hair, an upturned nose, a face with no expression. Then the motor launched completely its turn and disappeared from sight. A scorpion decorating a motor launch. Scorpia! It was the most slender of connections, but suddenly Alex was determined to find out where the boat was going. It was almost as if the silver scorpion had been sent to guide him to whatever it was meant. Whatever it was, he was meant to find. And there was something else, the stillness of the woman. How is it possible to be out through this amazing city without registering some emotion, without at least moving your head from left to right? Although Alex thought of Jason Gregorovich, he would have been the same. He and this woman were 2 of a kind. Alex turned to Tom. "Cover for me," he said urgently. "What now? What now?" "Tell her I wasn't feeling well, so I've gone back to the hotel." "Where are you going?" "I'll tell you later." Alex was gone, stuck in between an antique shop and the cafe up the narrowest of alleyways, trying to follow the direction of the boat. But almost at once he saw that he had a problem. The city of Venice had been built on over 100 islands. Mr. Gray had explained this on the first day. In the Middle Ages, the area had been a little more than a swamp. This was why there were no roads, just waterways and oddly shaped bits of land connected by bridges. The woman was on the water. Alex was on the land. Following her would be like to find his way through an impossible way in which their paths would never meet. Already he had lost her. The alleyway he had taken should have continued straight ahead. Instead, it suddenly veered off at an angle, obstructed by a tall block of flats. He ran round the corner, watched by 2 Italian women in black dresses, sitting outside on wooden stools. There was a canal ahead of him, but it was empty. A flight of heavy stone steps led down to the murky water, but there was no way forward, unless he wanted to swim. He pedaled left towards the water with a glimpse of wood and water churned up by the propellers of the motor launch as it passed a fleet of gondolas roped together beside a rotting jetty. There was the woman, still sitting in the stern, now sipping a glass of wine. The boat continued under a bridge so tiny that there was barely room to pass. There was only one thing he could do. He swiveled round and retraced his steps, running as fast as he could. The 2 women noticed him again and shook their heads disapprovingly. He hadn't realised how hot it was. The sun seemed to be trapped in the northwest streets, and even if in the shadows the heat lingered, already sweating, he burst back out onto the street where he had begun. Fortunately, there was no sign of Mr. Quay or the rest of the school party. Which way? Suddenly, every street and every corner looked the same. The man went central direction. Alex chose left and sprinted past a fruit shop, a candle shop, and an open-air restaurant where the waiters were already laying the tables for lunch. He came to a bend. There was a bridge so short he could cross it in 5 steps. He stopped in the middle and leapt over the edge. Gazing down the canal, the smell of stagnant water pricked his nostrils as there was nothing. The launch had gone, but he knew which way it had been heading. It still wasn't too late. If he could keep moving, he darted on. A Japanese tourist was about to take a photo of his wife and daughter. I heard the camera shutter click as he ran between them. When he got back to Tokyo, they would have a picture of a slim, athletic boy with fair hair hanging over his forehead, dressed in shorts and super dry t-shirt, with sweat pouring down his face and determination in his eyes. Tom seemed to remember him by. A crowd of tourists, a busker playing the guitar, another cafe, waiters with silver trays. Alex ploughed through them all, ignoring the shouts of protests hurled after him. There was no sign of water anyway, and the street seemed to go on forever, but he knew there must be a canal somewhere ahead. He found it. The road fell away. Grey water flowed past. He had reached the Grand Canal, the largest waterway in Venice, and there was the motor launch with the silver Scorpion, now fully visible. It was at least 30 meters away, surrounded by other vessels, and moving further into the distance with every second that passed. Alex knew that if he lost it now, he wouldn't find it again. There were too many channels opening up on both sides that it could take. It could slip into the private mooring of one of the palaces or stop at any of the smart hotels. He noticed a wooden platform floating on the water just ahead of him, and it was one of the landing stages for the Venice water buses. There was a kiosk selling tickets and mass of people milling about. A yellow sign gave the name of the point on this canal, Santa Maria del Gigolo. A large crowded boat was just putting out a number 1 bus. His school party had taken an identical boat from the main railway station the day they had arrived, and Alex knew that that it travelled the full length of the canal. It was moving quickly. Alex already a couple of meters separated from the landing stage. Alex glanced back. There was no chance he would be able to find his way through the labyrinth of streets in pursuit of the motor launch. The Vaporetto was his only hope, but it was too far. He had missed it, and there might not be another one for at least 10 minutes. The gondola drew past the gondola, singing into the grinning family of tourists. He was carrying, for a second, thought about hijacking the gondola. Then he had a better idea. He reached out and grabbed hold of the oar, snatching it out of the gondolier's hands. Taken by surprise, the gondolier shouted out, twisted round, and lost his balance. The family looked on in alarm as he plunged backwards into the water. Meanwhile, Alex tested the oar. It was about 5 meters long and heavy. The gondolier had been holding it vertically, using the splayed paddle end to guide his craft through the water. Alex ran. He stabbed down with the blade, thrusting into the Grand Canal, hoping the water wouldn't be too deep. He was lucky. The tide was low, and the bottom of the canal was littered with everything from old washing machines to bicycles, and wheelbarrows cheerfully thrown in by the Venetian residents with no thought of pollution. The bottom of the oar hit something solid, and Alex was able to use the length of wood to propel himself forward. It was exactly the same technique he had used for pole vaulting at the Brooklyn Sports Day. For a moment he was in the air, leaning backwards, suspended over the Grand Canal. Then he swung down deep, sweeping through the open entrance of the water bus and landing on the deck. He dropped the oar behind him and looked around. The other passengers were staring at him in amazement, but he was on board. There were very few tax collectors on the water buses of Venice, which was why they were here. Why there was nobody to challenge Alex about his unorthodox method of arrival on or demand a fare. He leaned over the edge, grateful for the breeze sweeping across the water, and he hadn't lost the motor launch. It was still ahead of him, travelling away from the main lagoon, back into the heart of the city. A slender wooden bridge stretched out of the corner of the canal. Alex recognised it as the bridge of the Academy, leading to the biggest art gallery in the city. He had spent a whole morning there, gazing at works by Tintoretto and Lorenzo Lotto, and numerous other artists whose names all seemed to end in O. Briefly, he wondered what he was doing. He had abandoned the school trip. Mr. Gray and Miss Bedfordshire would probably already be on the phone to the hotel, if not the police. And why? What did he have to go on? A silver Scorpion adorning a private boat? He must be out of his mind. The Vaporetto began to slow down. It was approaching the next landing stage. Alex tensed. He waited for one load of passengers to get off and another to get on. He would never see the motor launch again. He knew that he would never see the motor. He was on the other side of the canal now. The streets were little less crowded to him. Alex caught his breath. And then he saw. He wondered how much longer he could run. And then he saw the certificate that the motor launch had also arrived at its destination. It was putting into a palace A little further up, stopping behind a series of wind poles that slanted out of the water as if, like javelins, that they had been thrown by there by chance. As Alex watched, 2 uniformed servants emerged from the palace. One moved the boat, the other held out a white-gloved hand. The woman grasped her hand and stepped ashore. She was wearing a tight-fitting cream dress with jacket cut short above the waist. A handbag swung from her arm. She could have been a model striding off the cover of a glossy magazine. She didn't hesitate while the servants busied themselves unloading her suitcase. She climbed the steps and disappeared behind a stone column. The water bus was about to leave again quickly. Alex climbed out from the landing stage. Once again, he had to work his way around the buildings. Alex crowded onto the ground now. But this time he knew what he was looking for. A few minutes later, he found it. It was a typical Venetian palace, pink and white. Its narrow windows built into fantastic embroidery of pillars, arches, and balustrades, like something out of Romeo and Juliet. But what made the place so unforgettable was its position. It didn't just face the ground of the canal, it sank right into it. The water was lapping against the brickwork. The woman from the boat had gone through some sort of portcullis as if entering a castle, but it was a castle that was floating or sinking. It was impossible to say where the water ended and the palace began. The palace did at least have one side that could be reached by land. It backed out onto a wide square with trees and bushes planted into ornamental tubs. There were men, servants everywhere, setting up rope barriers, positioning oil burning torches, and unrolling a red carpet. Carpenters were at work constructing what looked like a small bandstand. More men were carrying a variety of crates and boxes into the palace. I saw champagne bottles, fireworks, different sorts of food. They were obviously preparing for a serious party. I stopped one of them. "Excuse me," he said. "Can you tell me who lives here?" The man spoke no English. He didn't even try to be friendly. I started a second man, but with the exact same result. He recognized the type. He had met men like them before. The guys at Point Blanc Academy, the technicians at Quay Software, these people who worked for someone who made them nervous. They were paid to do a job and they never stepped out of line. Were they people with something to hide? Perhaps Alex left the square and walked around the side of the palace. A second canal ran the full length of the building, and this time he was luckier. There was an elderly woman in black dress with a white apron sweeping the towel back. He went up to her. "Do you speak English?" he asked. "Can you help me?" "Si, con piacere, ma piccolo amico," the woman nodded. She put the broom down. I spent many years in London. I speak good English. Who can I do?" Thomas pointed at the building. "What is that place?" "It is the Cavedova." You try to explain? You know, in Venice we say casa. It means palace, and Vedova. She searched for the word. It is the palace of the window. Card Vedova. What's going on? There's a big party tonight for a birthday. Masks and costumes. Many important people. Whose birthday? The woman hesitated. Alex was asking too many questions, and he could see as he was becoming suspicious. Once again, age was on his side. He was only 14. What did it matter if he was curious? She ignored Rothman. She was a very rich lady, the owner of the house. Rothman liked the cigarette. But the woman's mouth had suddenly closed. There was fear in her eyes. Alex looked round and saw one of the men from the stand square out of the corner watching him. He realized he had outstayed his welcome. No one had been that pleased to see him in the first place. He sat there one last time. "I'm looking for Scorpia," he said. The woman stared at him as if she had been slapped in the face. She picked up the broom and her eyes darted over to the man watching them. It was lucky he hadn't heard the exchange. He hadn't sensed something was wrong, but he hadn't moved. Even so, Alex knew it was time to go. "It doesn't matter. Thank you for your help," he said. He made his way quickly up the canal. Yet another bridge loomed over ahead of him. he lost it, although he didn't exactly know why. He was grateful to leave the Windows Palace behind him. As soon as he was out of sight, he stopped and considered what he had learnt. A boat with a silver scorpion had led him to a palace which was owned by a beautiful and wealthy woman who didn't smile. The palace was protected by a number of mean-looking men, and the moment he had mentioned the name Scorpia to a cleaning lady, he had suddenly become as welcome as the plague. It was much to go on, but it was enough. There was going to be a masked ball tonight, a birthday party, important people had been invited. Alex was one of them, but already he had decided he was trying to be there all the same. Chapter 3. Invisible Sword. The full name of the woman who had entered the plaza was Julia Charoletta Glenys Rothman. This was her home, or one of them anyway. She also had a flat in New York, a Muse house in London, and a villa overlooking the Caribbean Sea and the white sands of Turtle Bay on the island of Tobago. She walked along a softly lit corridor that ran the full length of the building, from the jetty at one end to a private lift at the other. Her high heels clicking on the terracotta tiles. There was not one servant inside. She reached out and pressed the lift button. The white silk of her glove briefly touching the silver, and the door opened. It was a small lift, barely big enough for one person, but she lived alone. The servants used the stairs. The lift took her to the third floor and opened directly onto a modern conference room with no carpets, no pictures on the wall, no ornamentation of any sort. Stranger still, although it should have offered some sort of the most beautiful views in the world. The room had been built without a single window. But if no one could look out, nor could anyone look in, it was safer that way. The lighting came from the halogen lamps built into the walls, and the only furniture in the room was a long glass table surrounded by leather chairs. There was a door opposite the lift, but it was locked. 2 guards were standing on the outside, armed and ready to kill anyone who so much approached in the next half hour. There were 8 men waiting for her around the table. One was in his 70s, bold and wheezy, with sore eyes, wearing a crumpled grey suit. The man sitting next to him was Chinese, while the man opposite her head, wearing an open-necked shirt, was from Australia. It was clear that the people congregated in this place came from many different parts of the world, but they had one thing in common: a stillness, a coldness, even that made the room as a morgue. Not one of them there greeted Miss Rothman as she took her seat at the head of the table, nor did they bother looking at the time. If she had arrived, it must be exactly 1 o'clock. That was when the meeting began. "Good afternoon," Miss Rothman said. A few heads nodded, but nobody spoke. Greetings were a waste of words. The 9 people sitting around the table on the 3rd floor of the Windows Palace made up the executive board of one of the most ruthless and successful criminal organizations in the world. The old man's name was Max Grendel. The Chinese man was Dr. 3. The Australian had no name at all. They had come to this room without windows to go over the final details of an operation that would, in just a few weeks, make them richer by a sum of £100 million. The organisation was called SCORPIA. It was a fanciful name. They all knew it, invented by someone who had probably read too much James Bond, but they had to call themselves something, and in the end, they had chosen a name drawn from their 4 main fields of activity: sabotage, corruption, intelligence, assassination. Scorpia, a name which worked in a surprising number of languages and which rolled off the tongue of anyone who might wish to employ them. Scorpia, 7 letters that were now on the database of every police force and security agency in the world. The organization was formed in the early 80s. So during the so-called Cold War, the secret war that had been fought for decades between the Soviet Union, China, America, and Europe. Every government in the world had its own army of spies and assassins, and all of them prepared to kill or die. To kill or to die for their country. What they weren't prepared for, though, was to find themselves out of work, and 12 of them, seeing that the Cold War would soon be over, realizing that was exactly what they wouldn't be needed anymore. It was time to go into business for themselves. They came together one Sunday morning in Paris. The first meeting took place at the Maison Berthelion, a famous ice cream parlour on the Isle St. Louis, not far from Notre Dame. They were all acquainted, but they had tried to kill each other often enough. Now the pretty wooden panels, rubious antique mirrors and lace curtains, and over the 12 dishes of Berthelion's famous wild strawberry ice cream, they discussed how they might work together and make themselves rich. At this meeting, SCORPIA was born. Since then it had flourished. SCORPIA was all over the world. It had been brought down by 2 governments and arranged for a third to be unfairly elected. It had destroyed dozens of businesses, corrupted politicians and civil servants, engineered several major local disasters, and killed anyone who got in its way. It was now responsible for 1/10 of the world's terrorism, which it took on a contract basis. SCORPIA liked to think of itself as the Microsoft of crime, but in fact, compared to SCORPIA, Microsoft was strictly small time. Of the original 12, only 9 were left, but 1 had died of cancer, 2 had been murdered, but that wasn't a bad record. After 20 years of violent crime, there had never been a single leader of SCORPIA. All 9 were equal partners, but 1 executive who was always assigned to each new project, working in alphabetic order. The project they were discussing this afternoon had been given a code name, Invisible Sword. Julia Rothman was in command. I would like to report to the board that everything is progressing on the schedule, she announced. There was a trace of Welsh accent in her voice. She had been born in Aberystwyth. Her parents had been Welsh nationalists, burning down the cottages of English holidaymakers who had bought them as second homes. Unfortunately, they had torched one of these cottages with the English family still inside, and when Julia was 6, she found herself in an institution while her parents began a life sentence in jail. This was in a way the start of her own criminal career. It is now 3 months, she went on, since you approached to our client, a gentleman in the Middle East. To call him rich would be an understatement. He is a multi-billionaire. This man has looked at the world, at the balance of power, and he has decided that something has gone seriously wrong. He had asked us to remedy it. In a nutshell, our client believes that the West has become too powerful. He looks at Great Britain and America. It was the friendship between them that won the Second World War, and it is the same friendship that now allows the West to invade any country that it pleases and to take anything it wants. Our client had asked us to end the British American alliance once and for all. What can I tell you about our client? Elizabeth smiled sweetly. Perhaps he's a visionary interested only in world peace. Perhaps he is completely insane. Either way, it makes no difference to us. He's offered us an enormous sum of money, £100 million, to be exact, to do what he wants. To humble Britain and America and to ensure that they cease to work together as a world power. I am happy to be told that £20 million, the first of money, arrived in our Swiss bank account yesterday. We are now ready to move into phase 2. There was silence in the room as men waited for Miss Rothman to speak again. The faint hum of an air conditioner could be heard, but no sound came from outside. Phase 2, the final phase, will take place in under 3 weeks from now. I can promise you that very soon the British and the Americans will be at one another's throats. More than that, by the end of the month, both countries will be on their knees. America will be hated throughout the entire world. The British would have witnessed a horror beyond anything they could have imagined. We will be We will all be a great deal richer, and our friend from the Middle East will consider his money well spent. Excuse me, I have a question. Dr. Sweetback said politely. His face seemed to be made of waxen hair. Jet black, looked 20 years younger than the rest of him. It had to be dyed. He was very small and might have been a retired teacher. He might have been many things, but he was, in fact, the world expert on torture and pain. He had written several books on the subject. How many people do you intend to kill? He asked. Julia Rothman considered. It is difficult to be precise, Dr. 3. She was like, but it will certainly be thousands, many thousands. And they will be children? Yes, they will mainly be 12 and 13 years old. She said, It is going without saying very unfortunate. I adore children, even though I'm glad I had never had any of my own. That's the plan. I have to say, the psychological effects of so many young people dying will, I think, be useful. Does it concern to you? Not at all. Not at all, Miss Rothman. Dr. Fee shook his head. Does anyone have any objections? Nobody spoke, but out the corner of her eye, Miss Rothman noticed Max Grendel shift uncomfortably on his chair at the far end of the table. At 73, he was the oldest man there, with sagging skin and the liver spots on his forehead. He suffered from an eye disease that made him weak constantly. He was dabbing at his eyes now with tissue. It was hard to believe that he had been a commander in the German secret police and had once personally strangely and forging spy during a performance of Beethoven's Fifth. 73 years old, that's not old. That's pretty old, but my granddad's 77, 75. My great-granddad, who's dead, is now 92. Construction in Chelsea finished the privation company in London. The Australian asked. Construction in the Chelsea finished a week ago. The platform, the gas cylinders, and the rest of the machinery will be delivered later today. Will invisible sword work? It was the typical of Levi Kroll to be blunt and to the point. He had joined SCORPIA from Mossad, the Israeli Secret Service, and still thought of himself as a soldier. For 20 years. He had sex with an a 9mm pistol under his pillow. Then one night it had gone off. He was a large man with a beard that covered most of his, concealing the worst of his injuries. An eye patch hid the empty socket where he left his eye, where his left eye had once been. Of course, it will work. Miss Rothman snapped. It's being tested. We're testing it right now, but I have to tell you that Dr. Lieberman is something of a genius, a boy man if you have to spend time with him. And heaven knows I have to do plenty of that, but he creates brand new weapons and the beauty of it, all the experts in the world won't know what it is or how it operates. Of course, they'll work out in the end, and I made plans for that eventually, but then by then it will be too late. The streets of London will be littered with corpses. It'll be the worst thing to happen to children in a city since the Pied Piper. And what about Lieberman? Dr. T asked. I have this idea. We'll probably have to kill him too. He invented invisible sword, but he had no idea how we plan to use it. I expect he'll object. So he'll have to go. He'll have to go. Miss Rothman looked around. Is there anything else? She asked. Yes. Miss Max Grendel spread his hands across the surface of the table. Miss Rothman wasn't surprised that he had something to say. He was a father, and a grandfather. Worse than that, in his old age, he had become a sentimental. I had been with SCORPIA the very beginning, he said. I still remember our first meeting in Paris. I have earned millions working with you and enjoyed everything we've done, but this project Invisible Sword, are we really going to kill so many children? How will we be able to live with ourselves? Rather more comfortable than before, Julia Rothman muttered. No, Julia, Grendel shook his head. A single tick trickled from one of his diseased eyes. This will come as no surprise to you. We spoke of this last time we met, but I've decided that enough is enough. I'm an old man. I want to retire to my castle in Vienna. The invisible sword will be your greatest achievement, I'm sure, but I don't have the heart for it. It is time for me to step down. You must go ahead without me. You can't retire, Levy protested sharply. Why did you not tell us about this earlier? Another man asked angrily. He was black with Japanese eyes. He was diamond the size of the PM. He was a man. I told Miss Lossman, Mrs. Max Randall said reasonably. She's the project leader. I felt there was no need to inform the entire board. We don't need to argue about this, Mr. McAllister. Julie Watman said smoothly. Max has been talking about retiring for a long time now, and I think we should respect his wish. We should respect his wishes. It's only a shame, but as my late husband used to say, all good things come to an end. Mrs. Rothman's multimillionaire husband had fallen to his death for a 17-story window. It had happened just 2 days after their marriage. It's very sad, Max, she continued, but I'm sure you've done the right thing. It's time for you to go. She went with him down to the jetty. The motor launch had left, but there was a gondola waiting to take him back down to the canal. They walked slowly arm in arm. I'll miss you, she said. Thank you, Julia. Max Grendel patted her arm. I'll miss you too. I don't know how we can manage without you. The invisible sword cannot fail, not without the helm. Not without you at the helm. He suddenly stopped suddenly. I almost forgot. She exclaimed. I have something for you. She snapped her fingers and the servant ran forward carrying a large box wrapped in pink and blue paper tied with silver blue. It's a present for you, she said. A retirement present, something to remember us by. Miss Max Grendel had stopped beside the gondola. It was bobbing up and down on the choppy surface. A gondolier, dressed in a traditional stripy jersey, stood in the back alone in his oar. Thank you, my dear, he said, and good luck. Enjoy yourself, Max. Keep in touch. She kissed him, her lips lightly touching his withered cheek. Then she helped him into the gondola. He sat down awkwardly, placing the brightly coloured box on his knees. As the gondolier pulled away, Miss Rothman raised her hand. The little boat cut swiftly through the grey water. Miss Rothman turned and went back into the Winter's Palace. Miss Max Grendel watched her sadly. He knew that life wouldn't be the same without SCORPIA. For 2 decades, he had devoted all his energies to keep the organisation. It had kept him young, kept him alive, but now there were his grandchildren to consider. He thought of the twins, little Hans and Rudy. They were 12 years old, the same age as SCORPIA's targets in London. He couldn't be part of it. He had made the right decision. He'd almost forgotten the package resting on his knees. That was typical of Julia. Perhaps it was because she was the only woman on the executive board. She'd always been the one who was most emotional. He wondered what she had bought him. The parcel was heavy. On an impulse, he untied the ribbons and ripped off the paper. It was an executive briefcase, obviously expensive. He could tell from the quality of the leather, the hand stitching, and there was the label. It had been made by Goosey. His initials, M.U.G., had been engraved in gold just under the handle. With a smile, he opened it and screamed as the contents spilled over him. Scorpions, dozens of them. They were at least 10 centimetres long, dark brown with tiny pincers and flat swirling bodies. As they poured into his lap, they began to swarm off his shirt. He recognised what they were: hairy, thick-tailed scorpions from the Parabusus species, one of the most deadly in the world. Max Grendel fell backwards, shrieking, his eyes bulging, arms and legs flailing, and the hideous creatures found the gaps in his clothes and crawled inside his shirt and down the basement under his outfit. The first one stung him over and again. The screams dying in his throat. His heart gave out long and anxious. his heart gave out long before the neurotoxicants killed him. As the gondola floated gently on, being steered now towards the island cemetery of Venice, tourists might have noticed an old man lying still with his hands spread wide, gazing with sightless eyes at the bright Venetian sky. Bye-bye, everyone, and thank you for listening to me reading you these 3 chapters. Bye-bye, everyone, and thank you for listening to this book.